So as Matthew said, we continue finishing our Rooted series today. And this series is based on our discipleship value. We're looking this year at how to become and how we are better disciples of Jesus. And Pete did a great job speaking about how, he's saying thank you, you're welcome, how we've been with Jesus. And then Dan last week also did a great job talking about becoming like Jesus. Our discipleship value goes like this. Full devotion to Jesus is the goal. And so together we seek to encounter God, be with Jesus, be transformed into his likeness, become like Jesus, and equipped to live for him. So today we're going to look in a bit to how, as disciples of Jesus, how are we equipped to live for him? And we studied in the passage of John 15, which is when Jesus talks about him being the true vine and how we are the branches and all that. And we're going to focus a bit today in one piece of that passage to think about how do we live for Jesus. And I would love to read for us the passage first. And we're going to read from John 15, if you have your Bible, if you want to switch it on. But it will also be on screen, so you can follow from there. We're going to read from verse 9 to verse 17. And it goes like this. And this is Jesus speaking. So Jesus is saying, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now, remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give to you. This is my command: love each other." When Jesus is talking about being the true vine and us being the branch and bearing fruit, and I think when even reading at this bit, when you think about Jesus saying, no one has a love like when you lay down a life for your friends, and Jesus then go call the disciples friends, I think it's easy for us sometimes to just think what Jesus means, right? Jesus means Jesus died on the cross. But when Jesus was talking to the disciples about that, of course, he had not gone and he had not died on the cross yet. So I think just before we go completely into this passage and we unpack it, I want to give us a bit of context. Because I am the type of person that when I read the Bible, but specific when I read stories or like metaphors like this, when Jesus is comparing himself to a vine, my brain automatically goes to, why the vine, right? Could have been any other tree. They had lots of olives and other things, but Jesus talks about the vine. So looking into why the vine, and then the first thing I is studying and looking into it, we discover is the concept of being the vine was not a strange concept for the disciples. In the Old Testament, there are few prophecies about the vine. And in the Old Testament, talks about the vine as the people of Israel, the people that God had chosen, the people that God had freed from Egypt. And then in Isaiah 5, it talks about the vine as they were the vine that Jesus planted in good soil, but they did not bear fruit. So automatically what it's saying there is the people that Jesus had chosen and put them he freed them from Egypt, put them in the right place. They did not bear fruit. He was saying they did not do what God had told them to do. So when Jesus is saying, I am the vine, not just the vine, he says, I am the true vine. For the disciples, that means he is the Messiah. The people, when God chose and put them in a place, they have failed to do what God asked them to do. But he's saying, I have come and I will fulfill and I will do what my Father is asking me to do. So the concept of a vine, it was normal. And it is again, one more time, Jesus fulfilling the promise and the prophecies from the Old Testament. So that is the context of the vine, right? The other thing I want us to understand about this passage is Jesus is not speaking about being the true vine on its own. This text goes kind of together since from the chapter 13 to chapter 17 when Jesus prayed for his disciples and he prays for the believers who will come. And this happens during the Last Supper. Just before Jesus speaks all these things, he had just washed the disciples' feet. He knew he was going to be betrayed. And then after that, Jesus talks about the persecution. And then he prays for the disciples. And just after talking all this that we've heard, being the true vine, calling us the branches, saying that he will prune and all that, and then saying what we just read here, keep my commandments if you remain in my love. Straight after that, Jesus goes with the 3 disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, and it's where Jesus is arrested. And after that, we know what happens. Jesus died on the cross. I just wanted to give us a bit of context of why the vine and what was going on, because the text is not on its own in this passage. It's not just because all the parables are very good and important, but it's not just another story or another metaphor that Jesus is using to teach something to the disciples. Jesus is fulfilling a promise here, a prophecy here from years and years before when he says, I am the true vine. Watch me and you will see that I do as my Father has told me to do. And I love us to focus on verse 9 and to 12 that says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I've loved you. Did you see that? Jesus starts remaining my love, but then he goes into, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. The love that Jesus is talking here, it's agape, which agape in Greek means is a selfless love. It's a sacrificial love. It's a love who puts others' needs above themselves. So Jesus is saying, I've loved you with this sacrificial love, that I'm going to obey my Father to the cross. And that's the same love I'm saying you need to love each other. Jesus is not just talking about a simple feeling of, like, you know, when you see someone that you love and you have that feeling. Jesus is talking about a love that is sacrificial, that is willing to obey his Father completely to the cross. So when Jesus is calling us to remain in his love here, he's calling us to be willing to obey. And the word for commandment here is a word in Greek that it appears again in the New Testament 14 times. And all those 14 times, it's connected with the word love. So what Jesus is saying is, if you love me, if you want to remain in me, you need to obey me. Love here is automatically correlated with obedience. Love is not just a mindset. We don't just tell people, I love you. It's not just here or here. We show love in action, don't we? And in here, we show our love to God in obedience to him. Jesus' examples for his disciples when he's saying, there's no greater love than lay down your life for your friends. He knew what he was talking about because that's what he was about to do. And even on the cross when Jesus says, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? He doesn't stop obeying. He knew the joy that was set before him. He knew the cost was high and it was big. It costed him his life. It costed him his reputation because being crucified was not a cool thing to do. It was only very bad people that had done very wrong things that would die on a cross. It costed Jesus everything. But he didn't say no. He said, Father, I will show that I love you and I will show that I love my people and I will obey you and I will obey you to the end. Love is not just a mindset. It's followed by action, and in this case, obedience to God. And let me tell you, obedience comes with a cost. It will cost you something. The journey of discipleship will cost you something. To live a life for Jesus, there is a cost. I've been tired for many years of sometimes hearing a gospel that doesn't cost you anything, that actually just give you great things. Like this consuming gospel that just says, yes, God will give you, God will do that for you, God will change your situation. Like God is power and he does all that. But the truth of the gospel says obedience and discipleship will cost you something. For Jesus, it costed him his life, his reputation. It costed him knowing that my friends are going to betray me, are going to turn their back on me. It's going to cost me everything and everyone. Because when he ends up on that cross, no one is there. No one took his place. And the cost is clear. And in the words of Jesus, in Matthew 16, 24 to 26, that is the cost of discipleship. That is the cost of following Jesus. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, if I can paraphrase here, I would just say, if any of you wants to be my disciple, and I love how the New Living Translation puts it, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? To live a life for Jesus, you need to take up your cross. To say, God, I want to live a life of obedience to you. I want to live a life that displays you every day. You, God, not myself. There is a cost. And it costs us sometimes many things. It might cost you friends. It might cost you your reputation in your school, in your university. It might cost you many things. But there is a cost. If we want to obey, if we want to listen, if we want to be connected to the vine, being with Jesus, becoming like him, when we go out and we say, let's live for him, we need to be willing to, exactly like Jesus at that moment, he left with his disciples, went to pray, be with his Father, and the next thing, he's carrying a cross. What price are you willing to pay in obedience to God? How much are you willing to give up in obedience to God? What God might be asking you already to put down so you can live your life in obedience to him. What price are you willing to pay. It's not cheap to follow Jesus. Let me tell you that. It's the best decision you can make, but it's not cheap. If anyone sells you a cheap gospel, I would suggest read your Bible, read the Gospels, because you probably won't buy into that. Jesus said, if you want to be my disciples, if you want to live for me, you have to take up your cross. And it's not heavy, because Jesus also talks about how he take upon our burdens. It's not an actual cross. But we have to make the decision of saying, God, I love you. And I want to show you that I love you through my obedience. God, as I am connected to the vine, and I be with you, as I'm transformed to be like you, I want to go and live a life that honors you. You know, when you look at Jesus, the life Jesus lived, Jesus embraced the marginalized. Jesus embraced the ones that no one wanted. The people Jesus chose, his disciples, would never, ever have been chosen by any other rabbis. Jesus spent time with the lowest of the lowest. Jesus went into the temple and he turned the tables upside down. So controversial, so countercultural. It's like you are saying you are God. This is the place that they used to call that they would go to worship God. And Jesus go in that temple and he turned the tables because he's saying, hey, you don't do that in my Father's house. He stood up. He stood up for the marginalized. He stood up for women who were nothing in that culture. He welcomed the kids, you know. Jesus, when the kids were coming to him and the disciples were like, no, he's too busy. He said, hey, stop it. Let them come to me. You see how the life of obedience to God is such a countercultural life. What in your life now that you're just living according to the culture of this world, that in obedience to God, you might need to say, I'm going to take up my cross. If we want to live a life for Jesus, it's a life of obedience. God will ask you many, many things. I can tell you many times in my life that God has asked me to give up on things, to do things, to leave my life and my family in Brazil, to leave a great job, to become a missionary. And in the moment, I was just thinking, this is crazy. And I would not be here if in that moment my 20 years old had not just decided, because probably I was a bit braver than I am right now, to say, okay, go against everyone. And I think I've shared this before. None of my friends, no one in my family supported my decision. But I was so clear that God was asking me that. And I said, God, I will obey. And God came through. What price are you willing to pay? What in your life that you will live in just according to the culture of this world right now that you might need to put down so you can actually live for Jesus, so you can actually be a disciple for Jesus? And as part of this passage, Jesus keeps going and he says that we will bear fruit. And that a fruit that will last. I love that because it's a fruit that will last. And when we come in and want to be disciples of Jesus, our goal is to make more disciples, right? We don't want to just eat for ourselves. And I love that. That is one of Jesus' last commandments when he was here on earth. And it's right at the end of Matthew. Jesus had done everything. And then one of his last commandments here on earth is, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It doesn't stop there. And teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of age. You cannot make disciples if you have not gone through the journey of obeying God. You cannot make disciples. You cannot bear fruit if you have not gone through the journey of God. What are the commandments? There is the ones in the Bible, but God gives also specific commands to ourselves, according to our lives, according to where we are at. You see, Jesus says, go, preach, make disciples, baptize them, and teach them to obey. Love and obedience, in this case here, are so well correlated. And you cannot make disciples and teach them to obey if you've not gone through that journey yourself. See, obeying and making disciples, they go all together. Also, making disciples is not an easy thing, is it? Investing in people, giving your time. People mess up, and you don't give up, and you keep going. Because if God is telling you to do that, in an action, in an attitude of love for our God, we obey him. As the branch, we have the privilege of sharing his life and the responsibility of remaining. As the friends that Jesus talks there, we have privilege to know his will and the responsibility of obeying. Everything comes with a privilege and a responsibility. When you remain in Jesus, you start hearing more of his heart. And as you hear more of his heart, you started understanding more of Jesus. What is his will for your life? How does he want you to live your life? When you walk into the supermarket, in your school or whatever, you start hearing Jesus, what is the opportunity here? But it comes, that privilege of knowing Jesus' will comes with the responsibility of obeying. And let me tell you, the more you obey, the more God will share with you. It's not an exchange thing. Cool, I'm going to obey, so God will give me more. But when it flows from remaining in his love, you do that out of love for God, your heart is going to start being completely aligned with God's heart. You see, we looked at these past 3 weeks. We're looking to being with Jesus, become like him, so then you can fruitfully live a life of obedience to him. I could not talk about the vine without telling you my own experience with a real vine. This is my granddad. I grew up in the countryside, and my granddad when he bought the area where they live now, he bought a big piece of land, and he's got many plants. I've got a short video of Grace following him. He was going around because it was so hot, so he was watering the plants. I unfortunately don't have a photo of his vine. I don't know why I've never done that. But my granddad, vine, let me tell you, since I remember I exist, I don't remember when it was planted, but since a very young age, I remember the vine was there. And there was a time that I remember the vine was there, we had eaten all the fruits of it, and then it was there, beautiful, full of leaves. Then in a day I get there, and the vine looks dead. Let me tell you, as a child, I think I was probably 7 years old. And in an impulse of a child, nearly wanting to cry, I went to my granddad and asked, "What have you done?" The vine was beautiful. It was so beautiful. We used to love to literally stay underneath it because Brazil is very hot. So because the vine would cover, you would have shadow. And I look at it and it looks like that. And I said, "Granddad, you killed the vine." And my granddad, with all his patience and all his love for plants that I have not inherited, I love plants. I just don't know how to look after them well like he did. He sat me down And he started to explain. And he said, let me tell you, the vine is alive. I just had to prune it. And I said, but Granddad, but why does it look like that? Are you sure? And he just laughed and he was like, I've done it for many years. This is probably the first year you've noticed it, but I've done it for many years. And then he started to explain to me the process of pruning and the process of a vine. And he said, Marina, let me tell you, there is a specific time, which is normally autumn, that you have to prune the vine. You have basically to clean it completely. So then when spring comes, then there's winter, and then when spring comes, the vine will start growing new branches and new life. And then one thing interesting he said is, but do you know what happens sometimes? Is the vine in spring will start growing fruit, but that's not the time for fruit. So what I have to go and do is when those little fruits start growing at the wrong time, I have to go and I have to cut them. And I said, but why would you do that, Granddad? Like, we could have grapes earlier. What's wrong with you? First you think you have to kill the vine, so then it will be alive again. And then it gives you fruit earlier in the year, and you just decided that you could have fruit as well. And he said, that fruit that grows at the wrong time will never be good and will be worth nothing. What that fruit is actually going to do, if I leave it there, it will take all the nutrients, all the energy from the vine to itself. And what is meant to be good fruit won't have as much as it needs. And I remember like that year as a child, and this is, you forget things in your childhood, don't you? But the vine is such a clear picture to me, because I remember that year I decided I was going to pay attention to the vine. And that process exactly happened. The vine, after a few months, it started growing new branches and started being beautiful and full of leaves. And then I saw a few, and the grapes that grows when it's not good grape, they're so tiny that it's even hard to notice. But my granddad always knew, and he would go and cut those ones. And then it's always Christmas time, because Christmas is summer in Brazil. So I know sounds wrong, but Christmas in Brazil is summer. It's when the vine bears its fruit. And I remember that year, my granddad's grapes would look very, very similar to that. This is the process of maturing. And I remember that year that I decided to pay attention. And I come from a big family, and me and my cousins decided, let's count how many bunches of grapes granddad has made this year. My granddad's vine is probably less, I would say 10 meters long and like 2-3 meters wide. The max, I don't think even it's all that. It's a small vine, right? But because of the process that vine had gone through, we counted over 400 bunches of grapes. I remember we counted and we were like, this is weird. It was over 400. And they were delicious, and we enjoyed it during Christmas, in all sorts of puddings and juice and eating grapes and all that. You see, the process of discipleship, it's a process. It doesn't happen from one day to another. You start here with encountering Jesus, being with Jesus. Through that, he will prune you. He will cut what is not good, and like those small, tiny grapes that my granddad would find that we would not notice. That's what Jesus does in us when we're in the process of becoming like him. So then you can bear fruit. And fruit that will be good and fruit that will last. So after being with Jesus, becoming like him, then you are equipped to live for him. The live for Jesus is not just being a good person. It comes from your relationship that comes from the being and encountering Jesus. You see, it's a cycle that never ends. The being with Jesus never ends. The becoming like Jesus never ends. And the living for him, I hope it will only end in my life and your life the day we die. And if you're here this morning, you are really new to this concept. the beauty of the true vine that is Jesus, that there's always a space for more. There is always room for more to be added to that vine. I would love us to close our eyes now. And if you're here this morning and you have never made the decision to follow Jesus, I would love to invite you this morning to say, it might cost you something. And like Jesus says, you have to lay down your life. It might cost you your own life, not physically, but will cost the life you're living. But let me tell you, has Jesus endured that because he see and he knew the joy that was set before him? That is the invite we receive. So as we have our eyes closed this morning, if you've never made the decision to follow Jesus, or if you might have made it years ago and you feel today, I need to reconnect because I need the pruning, I need to be reshaped to bear fruits for Jesus, I'd love for you to raise your hand. There's just me and some leaders looking around, and I would love to pray for you. There is always room for more. Because, you know, like I said, my granddad's vine was a small one, but it just bore so much fruit. That is the place Jesus is inviting us to live.